Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
While he's here on the floor, I want to thank my colleague from Tennessee for this legislation, the hard work he's done on it, and also there was significant pain and difficulties experienced by his constituents in Tennessee, and this is something that I think will benefit all Americans and a rare bipartisan occasion around here, which we should all celebrate. I thank my colleague from Tennessee. Mr. President, first of all, I'd like to obviously join all of my colleagues in welcoming back our dear friend, the senator from Oklahoma, Senator Inhofe. We know he's gone through a very terrible family tragedy, and our thoughts and prayers continue to be with him and the members of his family, and we're very happy to see him back and working on this very important and leading and this very important aspect of our work here, and that is the Defense Authorization Act. Today I will have filed an amendment on behalf of Senator Sessions and myself. Senator Sessions, as we all know, the ranking member of the Budget Committee, to try to address the issue of this terrible effect of our defense establishment as a result of sequestration. Rather than go into the background of why it happened, the fact is that right now, in 2012 and 2013 and into 2014, we see a continued decline in funding for national defense, and then a rise as it's currently planned. This is current law. Well, obviously, it's not a rational approach, because our defense business and people and the Pentagon do not plan on a day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month basis. So what this amendment does is it preserves sequestration, which, by the way, I am opposed to, but the fact remains that in order to try to ease the burden of sequestration on our military, this would smooth out this dip that has taken place, and over an 8-year period until the expiration of current law in 2021 would, next year and the year after, for 2014, 15, 16, and 17, would give increases in spending and then reductions in those out years, and still achieving the same reductions in spending as dictated by sequestration. Now, the reason why I say that is because we are looking at dramatic impact on our military if we allow that spending to go down to that level for 2014 before we start climbing back up. Now, what is happening to our military today is impactful, it's disgraceful, it is harmful. In this very unsettled world we live in, we are seeing unprecedented reductions in impact on our national security that we have not seen since the end of the Vietnam War. And 2 weeks ago, the Armed Services Committee held a hearing to understand how the sequester had impacted the Department of Defense, and we learned, according to the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Ray Odierno, continued sequestration along this line will cause the Army to end, restructure, or delay over 100 acquisition programs. The Army, already drawing down by 80,000 active duty troops, will be forced to reduce and eliminate an additional 60,000. The Guard and Reserve would be forced to remove tens of thousands of men and women from their ranks. It amounts to an almost 20% cut in troop strength over the next 5 years, and we result in an Army that has tens of thousands of fewer soldiers than it had in 2011. Unit training has been curtailed, so that by the end of 2014, if we go down here, General Odierno forecasts that only 15% of Army Brigade combat teams will be fully ready in the event of a contingency. The Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Greener, testified that sequester means the Navy will operate more sparsely across the globe and less able to reassure our allies that U.S. interests around the world are served. Commandant of the Marine Corps said that because of sequestration, he was mortgaging long-term modernization to pay for keeping his Marines trained and ready today, but he also said the plan is not sustainable. As equipment and facilities age, he won't be able to pay for their upkeep while simultaneously paying for training. What will give, unfortunately, is readiness. As all the service chiefs testified, readiness means lives. The lower the readiness, the greater the risk to soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines' lives in the event of a deployment. The Chief of Staff of the Air Force told us that the Air Force had to ground 13 combat squadrons, because they lacked the funding due to sequestration. Other squadrons' flying hours were cut in half. He warned that continued cuts to flying hours, which are a certainty under this present plan, will guarantee that many more squadrons will forego mission readiness in the coming years. General Welch's least damaging plan to pay for sequestration is to cut some 25,000 airmen and 500 aircraft, almost 10% of the aircraft inventory. Obviously, what is not reflected in these numbers is the impact on morale and retention. The Air Force is deeply concerned about the number of pilots it's losing due to private industry. My colleagues may not know that there's a large exodus of airline pilots that will be leaving the airlines due to retirement in the next few years. There's a recent story where a number of pilots were offered a bonus, Air Force pilots were offered a bonus of $225,000 to remain in the United States Air Force, and most of them turned it down. And you know why they're turning it down? Is because they're not flying, and they're not sure whether they're going to be flying. We are cutting their flying hours to the bone. We are grounding entire squadrons. We are harming the morale and readiness of our military today in all of the services. I provide those examples. One Air Force leader said recently, if you're not flying your aircraft because it's grounded, you might as well go fly something else. I provide these examples because it's important for us to understand that our actions in Congress are presently and materially degrading our military's ability to defend the nation and protect our interests abroad. This is not an abstraction, especially at a time when international threats and instability are growing and not lessening. I acknowledge there's a fatigue after more than a decade of war. Cutting the defense budget seems an easy way to ameliorate the nation's dire budget problems, but such thinking is wrong. I remember the troop cuts and the budget reductions after Vietnam. I remember that it took us 15 years to restore the military to the proficiency and capability and professionalism that we have today. Defense represents less than 20% of total government spending. We could zero out the entire defense budget, would still, with the growth of entitlement spending and prevalence of tax loopholes, not be able to reduce the federal deficit. I've worked with colleagues for 2 years to try to address this issue. I've toured the country with Kelly Ayotte and Lindsey Graham and met community and business leaders. I joined with our distinguished chairman, Carl Levin, hosted a series of meetings with senators to find common ground. None was to be found. So here we are, my friends, with an obvious impact for next year of sequestration, which would dramatically impact our ability to defend this nation. So in desperation, I'm asking my colleagues to at least agree to smoothing out this path, which would end up with the same reductions in spending, but at least not hit this bottom level, which will cause us to have planes that won't fly, ships that can't sail, and men and women in the military unable to train and operate. And once we reduce and impact operations and maintenance, readiness suffers, and readiness incapability only shows up over time. I spent last Sunday with my friend from Tennessee, the senator from Tennessee, and I were at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where we spent some time with the men and women who are serving in the military. We were briefed by the military leadership and the command master sergeants of the various units that are based at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. We found that already the ability to train, the ability to retain, the ability to act with the kind of proficiency which is necessary in today's world is already being seriously degraded. So I asked my colleagues, in working with Senator Sessions, and this will be a Sessions amendment, to consider at least this amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act so that we can at least soften the blow to some degree of sequestration. Senator Lamar Alexander and I were taken by the patriotism and the hard work and the quality of the men and women who are serving our nation in the United States Army at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. But Senator Alexander and I were both deeply alarmed at the fact that these people are literally having to budget and operate on a month-to-month basis. They are not able to sustain the level of readiness and capability that this nation needs at this very difficult time. So I urge my colleagues to consider this amendment that Senator Sessions will be sponsoring, and I look forward to debating and hopefully passing this legislation to give the men and women the relief that they need to serve this country with the patriotism, but now with the efficiency that we need in these difficult times. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.